We are going to get started here in just a couple of minutes. So if you haven't grabbed your food, grab that, settle in, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes as more people join. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Let's get started. So to orient us today around today's conversation, for those of you who are new to Fieldwork, we are an incubator for social good leaders and startups. We believe in the world's best future, and we do that by creating meaningful work in the world. And one of the ways that we do that, and if you are an entrepreneur, a small team, a business, or an organization, we are trying to create that good culture in the world. We do that in our community. And so we want to invite you to our community. And we do that as we learn to know ourselves, to lead others into creating meaningful work together. And so we've been doing these webinars, these lunch and learns every Wednesday from noon to 1. And we do that we jump in with different guides in the community, and they walk us through frameworks, through methodologies, through topics to help us integrate into our own work and to create meaningful work ourselves. And so today we have Jonathon. He is going to be sharing about owning the power of your leadership voice. And before I have him jump on here, you guys can comment in the little chat bubble below. Any questions throughout the time as he's talking and sharing. We'll try and do a little Q&A at the end. If not, answer your questions as the webinar is going. So Jonathon, tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself a little bit to those who are new on here, and then if you can also tell us a little bit more about Five Voices specifically as you jump into owning our own leadership voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to be with everybody today. I put in the chat right now that I forgot my lunch. So if I can live vicariously through you, I'd love to see you pop in the chat what it is that you're eating, if you're sharing lunch with us today, or maybe the coffee that you're sipping on, just so I can, live vicariously through you. Thanks, Mark. Don't worry about it. I got lunch coming after this, so I'll just bear with it for the time being. So yeah, drop in what you're eating. I'd love to see it. But yeah, so I am just privileged to have this conversation with you all. Like Meredith said, Fieldwork is an incubator for social good leaders and startups, which means that we help leaders grow to know themselves, to lead others into meaningful work. And it's really work that is for the common good of our cities, work that benefits everybody, and really seeing the most vulnerable in our cities flourish through the cultures we're creating in our organizations, as well as through the work that we're doing in our organizations. So that looks like, being a freelancer, trying to get your career off the ground and grow your reach. It looks like being an entrepreneur. You have an idea for a nonprofit or for a business that you're trying to get off the ground. Or you have a small team you're trying to grow and lead effectively. All of those things have opportunities to really be done in isolation and work alone. And we believe that working alone really robs you of your humanity, and then it robs you of your impact. It's bad for you and bad for your work. And so everything that we're doing is just about convening and guiding leaders. And that's really the role that I get to play in coaching and in consulting, and providing touch points like this for our community. And one of the main frameworks that we use, like Meredith mentioned, is this idea of the 5 voices. There's 5 leadership voices in this framework. Each of them have their own strengths and their own pitfalls. And so the goal today is to help you kind of explore those. If you are familiar with the 5 voices, if you have gone through, some work in the 5 voices, I'd love for you to also drop in the chat, what is your foundational voice? And if you don't know, that's okay. We can talk about that later, and you'll get to know a little bit more today as we go along about what your voice might be. And we can definitely help you to discover that. However, if you do know it, I'd love to see just, get a finger on the pulse of who we have here. So if you know your foundational voice, please drop it into the chat. We can see what we have on the call with us today. So here we are. This is the topic that we're talking about today, and I'm going to go back and make sure that I'm recording here. Yeah, we're good there, so that we can look back on this for future use. And so we're talking about owning the power of your voice. And maybe even that title is new for you, to think about you having a leadership voice, or what it means for you to be a leader. Well, the benefit of this this framework is it really recognizes that everybody has a voice and is a leader. And with that comes, like Spider-Man's uncle said in the Tobey Maguire version, that comes with great responsibility. That power comes with responsibility. And so we're going to talk about how to tend to that. But where I want us to start today is this tool right here. You heard us say this a couple times, even in the first few minutes that we've been on. To know yourself, to lead yourself so that you can lead others. Take a second and just look at this tool here. Kind of notice, maybe where your eyes drawn, and what this means for the reality of your leadership. We call this the school of self-awareness, because as you can see represented in this infinity loop, it never ends. There's always more work we can do, and that's a good thing. There's always more growth and more transformation that we can be about. But I want us to start here at the bottom there, where you see those tendencies. We all have tendencies. We, through a combination of nature, how we're wired internally, nurture, how we were brought up in our culture or our family systems or our faith traditions or whatever it may be, and also the roles that we've had to play, the best fit we've had to fit into, and the choices we've made. All of those things have come to a combination of making your tendencies. So some of us tend to be more boisterous when we're in group settings. Others of us tend to be more observant and fall into the background and just observe. Those are tendencies that are neither good nor bad, but they shape our patterns. You look there to the right there, that those tendencies then shape our patterns of thinking, of behaving, of emoting. They become like this wired neural pathways that we fall into and just kind of unconsciously move about in the world based off of these tendencies and these patterns. And those patterns shape our actions. And as we know, or we can hear our parents voice in our heads telling us that our actions have consequences. And those consequences are what shape our reality. So what it means to know yourself is really to look at your reality and then do some work to discover your tendencies. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The 5 voices is really a trait to help us understand, our tendencies from a natural perspective. And then how has that led to the reality that we're in right now? And if you look at the dotted line of those patterns there, that is really the opportunity we have to intervene. So we can recognize our tendencies, we can honor them for what they are, but we can intervene with new ways of thinking, new ways of emoting, new ways of behaving, introduce new patterns. And that's what it means to start to lead ourselves into different actions that have different consequences, that is hopefully shaping the reality that we want to see brought about into the world through our work, through our lives, through our leadership. And so I want you to keep this in mind, because it's going to be really easy to, as we're going about this, to, you know, as you're learning about one of the voices, being like, oh my gosh, yes, that's totally my mom, or that's totally my, you know, my assistant director, that's totally, you know, my boss, whatever it may be. But we're really going to focus on ourselves here and start by knowing ourselves to lead ourselves more effectively, and then inviting others and inspiring others to do the same. So the plan for today is we're going to walk through the 5 voices so you get an understanding of all of the 5 voices. And you're listening for the sense of wanting to be able to honor each voice, to value its contributions on your teams, but also assessing for yourself, like, where does this sit with you? Could this be your foundational voice? The 5 voices is really important to understand the order of your voice. So it's not just that you are one of the voices. You have all 5 of them at play, but what's most important is those first 1 or maybe 2 that really help to shape your foundational leadership voice. This is where you kind of live and work and move about in the world. And so there's a way of doing that that we want to come to awareness of. So we're going to talk about each of the 5 voices, and we're going to talk about what is their best contribution to a team. So you know that you bring something valuable to the teams and the communities you're a part of, but also that you know that there's opportunities to honor the contributions in other people that maybe used to be really hard for you to get along with or hard for you to appreciate. Well, maybe you can understand what their contribution really is. But then we're going to also spend time talking about what are the weapon systems? What are the things that we turn to in conflict based off of our foundational voice? And then we're going to talk about the triggers. How do we kind of get tripped and trapped into reaching for those weapons? And what can we do maybe to put a holster on them, to maybe lead ourselves differently into a different pattern? Or maybe we would start to engage with those weapon systems. Maybe we can lead ourselves into a different reality. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get started. And like Meredith said, there is a question and answer, a chat feature on the bottom of the screen here for you to put in your thoughts as they come along, and we'll tend to those at the end. So the first voice that I want us to learn about here, oops, there we go, is the nurturer. Take a second and look at this dashboard infographic. This is the nurturer. The nurturer on our teams, those with the foundational nurturer voice, they are the champions of people, of relational harmony, of values. So these are the ones who have their finger on the pulse for how people are doing, how people are experiencing maybe some of the new strategies we're rolling out. They know how it's going to affect people. They're experiencing, you know, how people are feeling in a meeting, and they can pick up on those things like a spider sense of like, oh no, that's going to rub them the wrong way, or there's conflict here. And they do that extra legwork of making sure that everyone's okay. They're the ones bringing in the extra coffee for someone who they know had a hard day. They're the ones who's bringing us to awareness of things we need to celebrate, like work anniversaries or big accomplishments. And they love to just cherish and relish in the achievements of others on the team. It can actually be hard for them to see themselves as a competent professional on the team. They just feel just happy to be in the room sometimes, and that can lead to them not really valuing their own contribution. If you take a second and look at the left side, that voice volume, they speak at a really low voice volume, because one of the things that's really important to the nurturer is to not disrupt relational harmony. And so even though they can sometimes see things that other voices aren't paying attention to, like how people react when we roll out a new product or a new vision, or we're making a change, they know how it's going to affect people, but they don't bring that critique outright. But they sometimes will hint at it in a maybe a little bit more passive aggressive way, or they just kind of get really uptight in themselves and don't bring it to the team. And so they speak at a really low volume. And oftentimes organizations and teams are running at such a fast pace towards this future that we're trying to achieve and accomplish that we don't take the time to really tend to what the nurturer is bringing. So you look at that, watch out for nurturers have a fear of conflict, and they often won't speak out. So when you have a nurturer on your team and they're silent, it does not mean that they don't have something to say. What it means for us to watch out for them is to empower them by letting them speak first. So in our team meetings, we'll literally say, okay, our nurturers, what do you have to say first? And they always have the opportunity to pass, but we honor that and protect that so that they can be empowered to bring their contribution. We also empower them by affirming their competence and the genuine value of their contribution. And if you look there, you see the population representation of people who speak nurture as their primary language, 43%. So 43% of people fall into this category of being primary foundational voice nurturers. So nurture, to you, the nurturing leader, I want to say to you that your best contribution is to you bring a value of people, a relational oil that keeps us going and actually reaches most of the world. Most of the world responds well to this sense of nurturing. And so if you didn't know it, or if you need to hear it again, you are valued and you bring such an immense contribution to what we're doing, and we need you. So that is the nurturer. And so if you feel like maybe you're a nurturer or a nurturer, this is something really good to keep in mind as we walk through this. So this is the first voice we're going to start with. The second voice that we're going to look at in the 5 voices is the creative. So the creative is the champion of future ideas, of innovation and organizational integrity. So the creatives are the ones who are standing on their tippy toes, looking out on the horizon, and they're watching trends. They're watching, where we're headed as a team, where we're going as an organization, and they can kind of pick up on things that, other people aren't even paying attention to yet. And they have this ability to think so outside the box, to mess with the models and the systems of the way we've been thinking about things in our organization or in our industry. And they're the ones that are looking to disrupt and to really bring a new concept, outside of the box thinking to what we're doing. Now, if you look on the voice volume, you see that they also speak at a lower volume. But this is what's important to note, is that it's not because they're not willing to share, but sometimes they are so futuristic, so outside of the box, and so conceptual in their thinking. Their mind is this whiteboard that they're constantly filling up with models and strategies, that sometimes they can live in that place so much that there's a complete disconnect to those of us who are like living in the present moment. And so we'll be in a meeting and they're sharing what it is that they're seeing or they're thinking about, and it's just crickets. We're thinking, are we in the same meeting talking about the same thing? That is so out of there. But then a year later, when we realize that they were right, it's a maddening effect for the creative. And we're like, hey, what we should have been thinking about? We should have been talking about this, this, and this. And they're like, oh my gosh, I said that a year ago, or I've been saying that. That's some of the dilemma for a creative. And so what to watch out for? Creatives can struggle to communicate effectively, and they have idealistic perfectionist tendencies. So this means that they so vividly can see this kind of, this, who we can be as an organization, what we can do as a society, who we can become as leaders, that if we just get like 90% close to that, that's amazing. But to the creative, they just focus on that 10% gap. They know so vividly what we can become that they are just not satisfied with getting close, but not close enough. And this can have a negative effect on the teams that we participate in. So if you look at the population, only 9% of creative or people speak creative as their primary leadership voice. And so you knew you were special, you knew you were unique, creative leader. Thank you for always looking towards the future. And this is how we can commit to empowering you as your team. So if you have a creative on your team, empower them by not judging them on what they say first. So when they're sharing their idea or what they're seeing conceptually or in the future, let them take a couple runs at it, because what they say first isn't always what they mean. And so it's our job to just kind of say it another way, say it a different way, help us to understand, build a bridge for us for what you're seeing to what we're doing. And it's always worth the work to hear that. And to the creative, I'll also say that it's okay to be wrong sometimes. Sometimes you feel like you can so vividly see the future and we're working towards it, but then something like, I don't know, a global pandemic happens and we're all of a sudden in a different future than you thought we'd be in. And it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to kind of not live up to that internal perfectionism that you have. So the best contribution that the creative brings to a team, the power of your voice, is that you bring this outside of the box, strategic, futuristic, innovative thinking that is really going to position our organizations and our teams to be effective in creating meaningful work and accomplishing our mission. So that's the second voice that we are looking at. And the third one is the guardian. And there's a little bit of a hint in the name here. The guardian sees themselves as the protector of our resources. They're the champions of due diligence, They're the champions of efficiency and systems and processes. They're the ones that are going to put in place the step-by-step process that we all can follow and adhere to, so that we actually accomplish what it is that we're doing in the first place. Now, you notice that they speak at a little bit of a higher voice volume. So they are not afraid of speaking up and speaking out. They're not afraid of challenging maybe some new ambitious idea, because when a guardian hears an idea, they're not necessarily asking, what can we gain? They're asking, is it worth what we might lose? Is it worth potentially risking all that we've worked so hard to accomplish thus far? And so they're thinking about our resources of people, of time, of money. They're the ones that you want to really protect those resources and do their due diligence of really trying to seek out the truth of what it is that we're actually playing with, and not just some ambitious, frivolous ideas. But what to watch out for, because of that, they can be really risk averse, which means that they can have this negative critique that can sometimes feel so excessive, it deflates the organization. And they're okay with that, 0.05% increase year over year, because they want that repeatable process that they can trust. So they're not going to be the ones that's going to necessarily disrupt what we're doing and go after that ambitious, scalable growth. And so guardians can be that risk-averse voice at the table. But if you notice at the population, 30%, the second only to the nurturer. Guardians are so represented in our communities, in our teams, in the industries that we're trying to lead in. It is worth empowering them, as you see at the bottom there, by welcoming their challenge and critique and their commitment to due diligence. If we can welcome and make a space for them to bring all of their questions, and it's probably more than we would feel comfortable answering, but get them the level of detail that they need, well, then they're the ones who are actually going to make things happen. There comes a point when a guardian has asked all of their tough questions, they've gotten clear on the vision and the strategy and how we can, hedge our bets and really protect our resources with contingency plans, or focus in on a small pilot project and not put all the money on the table right away. If they can get to that place, then they're the ones that are going to be the implementers and the drivers of making sure we meet our deadlines, we stay within budget, and we're actually delivering on our goals. So guardians, we love you. Forgive us for not being patient with your questions and your due diligence, but we are committing to doing that so you can bring your best contribution. All right, the connector, and I'm jamming through this because there's a lot to cover, but I hope that something is sparking in your mind about where this might lie for your own leadership makeup. So the connector, they are the champions of relational networks. They champion internal collaboration and effective communication. And you notice that they speak at a higher voice volume, because typically you can always spot a connector. They're the ones at a party or a networking event that they've already made their rounds a couple times over. They're doing laps, checking in with different people. But even if they're not totally extroverted, they do just bring this energy around the work that we're doing. So they're bought in. They bring this energy of the next goal or initiative or project that we're doing. They're really good at energizing the team. And a lot of that comes from being effective with their communication. They have a way of communicating in a way that can connect people to their aspirations, that can rally people to causes. And so they make great, salespeople, but they don't like to be perceived as salesy, because it's not so much that they're selling something, it's that they're inviting people to participate in something they believe in. And so they're also great at donor development, at fundraising, and just really pulling us and pushing us towards the common goal that they believe in. But here's what to watch out for. Connectors always interpret challenge of their ideas as personal. And so they walk around with this total network, relational networks that they're always bringing in. I know somebody you should talk to. You should collaborate with this person, or we need to bring in this person I have a resource for. And so they always have this idea that they're putting on the table. And if you push back against that idea, and maybe to some of the other voices, that's just that idea doesn't seem to be working for what we're doing. But to the connector, it feels personal. They're literally putting their heart on the table. They're putting their friendships on the line as a resource. And for you to push back against it, or to not believe in it, or whatever it may be, it's hard for them to distinguish that feedback from a personal critique. So here's how to empower them. Give them the time to share their ideas and their passions. And then if you need to bring in a critique, appreciate them. They know that you value their efforts, the legwork they do to bring in people into our work, or whatever it may be. They need to know that you appreciate them and they value them, and then they'll be able to hear the critique that you have for them. And connectors, you see that 11% of the population actually speaks connector as a primary voice, which means that it's not a lot, but sometimes we can see them or feel them even more so because they bring so much energy and they're constantly pulling people into different opportunities. And so the connector, the contribution that you bring energy, you bring network and people and connection and collaboration, and you bring passion. That is really an undervalued resource in a lot of places, and you kind of only feel it when it's missing. So connectors, we value you. We thank you for all the legwork that you do for our teams and organizations. All right, last but not least, in their opinion, for sure, is the pioneer. Now, the pioneer is a champion of strategic vision, and they have this results focus, and they are driven to solve problems. You put a problem in front of them, and they are going to drive to solve it. They are the ones who are typically out in front, high levels of leadership. They can't be held down too long. They have goals and ambitions, and they view the world kind of like an old school Risk, the game Risk. They're looking at the board, and they're trying to align people with resources and opportunities and systems so that we can actually accomplish and achieve what it is that we set out to do. And so you notice that they speak at the highest voice volume. They actually speak at a voice volume so loud, it can actually drown out some of the other voices that are speak at a little bit of a lower volume. So that's something to be aware of. For pioneers, watch out for your lack of sensitivity. It can be this unwillingness to listen, and that leads people to perceive you as being arrogant. And so there may be some people, some leaders in your life that you think that they are just arrogant, that they don't listen, that they're not approachable. And it could be just that they have a pioneer leading voice. And so they are driven and they are driving us as a team. And sometimes pioneers, when you drive your team, you can push us to do things that we never would have accomplished on our own just by your sheer effort and energy. But sometimes you can drive us into the ground as well. So be aware of that lack of sensitivity. And this is my favorite thing. How to empower them? Don't worry, they will empower themselves. Just affirm their competence. So for a pioneer, competence is like their currency. They deal in competence. And so they're constantly assessing who in this room is the most competent to reach our goals. And most of the time the answer is them. Where they go wrong is by saying so much out loud with a lack of sensitivity. But if they can hone that in there, the best contribution you can bring to us pioneers is your competence and your confidence. We need that. You see things we don't because you have that military-like strategic thinking of aligning things so we can actually scale that mountain that we're going after. But do it in a way where you can actually listen and value the other voices at the table because they have resources to bring to our strategies that maybe you haven't thought of before or you can't see. So those are the 5 voices. As we've gone through this, I'd love for you to drop in the chat maybe what your best guess, if you don't know already, what your voice might be. So as we've talked about the 5 voices, maybe you're thinking about, well, now that I've heard all 5 of them, I think that maybe I might be here. And don't worry, we're not going to hold you to it. But if you're maybe thinking, oh, I might be a pioneer, I might be a connector or nurturer, go ahead and drop it in there. I'm just curious to see what we have. And so that's the best contribution that each of those 5 voices bring. At their best, they bring this resource, this perspective, they champion these things that we all need. And so we value them and we work hard to really honor all of the voices that we can cover more ground as a team than we otherwise would have. But here's something I want to introduce to us, that at our best, that's the contribution that we bring. But I also want us to recognize that each of the voices have a weapon system. Now, what is a weapon system? Well, a weapon system is that unique way that you, when triggered, when in conflict, when you feel wronged, when you feel threatened, you act out from that tendency, from that pattern of your foundational voice. How does a nurturer specifically act out when they feel threatened or violated or triggered? How does a pioneer do that? And some ground rules about these weapon systems as we move forward is that they're all bad. Some of them maybe sound more, worse than others, but they all do damage on teams. They all kind of erode team culture. They all kind of limit our ability to perform. And so we're going to walk through these and understand, like, the power of our voice is, yes, our best contribution, but also the power of voice can have a negative effect on our teams and on our work. So let's walk through them. We're going to do this in reverse order. So don't worry, pioneers, you don't have to wait until the end. Patience is not necessarily a key characteristic of the pioneer. So we're going to start with you, the pioneer. The pioneer's weapon system is the grenade launcher. What does this mean? Well, when the pioneer feels triggered, when the pioneer feels wronged, and we'll talk about what triggers them in a second, what they reach for is this high impact, high velocity grenade launcher that comes out in the shape or the way of a strategic attack and assault on a person in a way that really takes them out of the table, out of the group, out of the meeting, and to the point where it has residual damage to some of the other people involved. It's never a good thing for pioneers to reach for their grenade launcher. And I'm sure some of our pioneers are resonating with maybe some moments where you felt triggered or wronged or in conflict, and you know that you have that one thing, that one comment, that one rant, that one move you can pull out that would completely take somebody out of the game in terms of the conversation that we're having. And it does immense damage to teams, and it comes out in the way of really attacking the person as a whole and engaging in a conflict that is just crossing the line. And pioneers have probably seen that even when we come to that same meeting the next day, people can still kind of smell the residue of a grenade going off. People still feel that the culture is still kind of icy and still kind of on edge from that one attack. And so pioneers, to all of your drive and ambition and strategy and really desire to achieve and accomplish, when you feel triggered, you target and hone those in on a person or a team in a way that does immense damage. And we call that the grenade launcher. And some of us have been on the other end of the grenade launcher, and it can be devastating. It could really be irreparable for some teams unless there's really intentional repair done with intentional conversation and relationship repair. But what can happen is that the pioneer can get so driven and feel so bogged down and triggered, and we'll talk about it, the triggers in a second, that they just go for the kill shot in the grenade launcher. So the weapon system of the pioneer is the grenade launcher, and it's something that is never a good thing. It's never a positive contribution to reach for that grenade launcher. So the work of the pioneer, as we'll talk about, is to learn how to put that safety hatch on the grenade launcher and not take out people outright, even though they feel like they are, you feel like they are incompetent or whatever it may be. So that's the first weapon system. The second weapon system, and I have to be kind of right here and say that this is my voice. I'm a connector first voice. And so I know this weapon system very well. This is cyber warfare. So different than the grenade launcher, because when the pioneer reaches for the grenade launcher, there is no mistaking where it came from. You can tell that it was this person attacked this person and it had a lasting impact. But the connector, because they have their hands in so many relational networks and they have their finger on the pulse of different communities and they're trying to collaborate, when they feel triggered, when they feel wronged, they're not going to outright bring challenge or critique or have an upfront conversation. Instead, they're going to resort to cyber warfare. What that looks like is just poisoning the well of how we think about a person or a team, or whatever it may be, with little comments. So it could be like if Meredith were to come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking of hiring, so-and-so to work on a project. And then my response, because I feel wronged by so-and-so, is, oh, well, that's really brave of you to hire them. Yeah, good for you. I thought you were going, for more of a junior, or you weren't going for such a junior staff. They don't have as much experience, but if you're looking to really train someone, then yeah, go for it. So all of a sudden now we're thinking differently about so-and-so, and so-and-so doesn't get the job and can't trace it back to the connector, but there's just these little drips of poison that we can put in the well. And all of a sudden everybody thinks differently about a person or about a topic or an opinion, because the connector has just subtly, and sometimes the connector isn't even aware, if they're not self-aware enough to know that they're doing this, but they just kind of say little comments. Well, I just don't know if that's the best idea. Or how are we thinking about this? And are they really the person to bring in? I don't know. I just want to ask the question. And that's enough to just do a lot of damage and undermine someone's credibility, undermine a whole team's efforts or strategies or whatever it may be. And so the connector's weapon system, it's hard to trace. it's hard to even, draw the connection back to them, but they are engaging in cyber warfare where they're subtly hacking how we think about somebody, and shifting the narrative because they're so effective in the communication and they are so connected, and they have this fear of direct conflict and conversation, because they don't want to be perceived as like not being a resource or a team player. So they resort to this cyber warfare. So that's the weapon system of the connector. And so if you didn't know your voice before, as you walk through the weapon system, maybe it'll help bring it to life a little bit. Okay, the Guardian. What is the weapon system of the Guardian? Well, that truth-seeking, due diligence, resource-protecting disposition of a Guardian that we love and value so much. When the Guardian feels triggered, when they feel attacked or they're in conflict, then what happens is that truth-seeking gets a little bit more pointed, a little sharper, a little more direct, and it becomes interrogation. The weapon system for the Guardian is interrogation. So if you're on the other end of that and you're getting these questions asked, and the Guardian's doing the due diligence, but then all of a sudden you start to feel like you're getting strapped into a chair, and the question starts to be more pointed. They start to be more intense and more in their volume. Then really all of a sudden you found yourself in an interrogation. And again, the Guardian can sometimes not even know when they've switched to their due diligence and their process and efficiency to all of a sudden being an interrogation. And the goal when they've done that switch, the Guardian is not necessarily trying to understand the strategy we're going after or the idea. They're trying to shoot it down. They're trying to force the other person to confront, to make a confession that this is not a risk worth taking. And again, these are subconscious things that we can fall into if we're not aware. And so for my Guardians on here, think about times when you have kind of been more bullish in your questions, in your critique. You can become more aggressive, and it's kind of under the guise or the motivation really to try to get to truth, get to due diligence, but it can become a weapon really quickly, and you don't even know it, but you've pummeled somebody into the ground. You pummeled an idea into the ground based off of your sharp and pointed, aggressive interrogation. So the weapon system for the Guardian is interrogation, and it can be subtle, but it can also be really, really strong and effective. Okay, so the creative voice is actually, there's two parts to the creative voice. So if you're a first voice creative, but a second voice connector, and we often call this the creative connector, or if you see that F there, that stands for creative feeler. So whichever label resonates most with you, but it's really the same thing. The creative, remember that future conceptual thinker, that innovative thinker. But if your second voice is a connector, then what you do with that creativity, you go towards that second voice of people, collaboration, and ideas and stuff. And so that is an amazing contribution to have on a team and to, as a leader, to be a creative connector. But when you're triggered, then you have a tendency to reach for your weapon, which is really to Hulk out. So you remember Bruce Banner, the mild-mannered scientist who has himself in check. When he's triggered and he gets angry, then he turns into this Hulk and just does damage, and with this real sloppy impact on whatever is in his wake. Well, that's the same thing for the creative connector or the creative feeler. When you feel triggered, what happens is that you can just have an episode of just bursting out of conflict, of ranting, of really kind of engaging and attacking what's in front of you. And sometimes it's done in a really sloppy way where there's a lot of residual damage done around you. And if you're not in the wake of it, sometimes it's kind of amusing to watch somebody who's typically more reserved or mild-mannered or logical in their thinking, who typically has themselves in check, all of a sudden unleash in this episode. And if you're not in the wake of it, it can be kind of surprising and almost like, oh my gosh, I didn't know you were capable of that. But it always does damage. The Hulk is not known for his precision. He's not known for, really being strategic and effective in his attack. So if you're hulking out, chances are that you are not just responding to the thing that's triggering you, but you go overboard, you go above and beyond and do damage that is kind of not necessarily what's even being talked about. It kind of gets blown into this bigger deal, and that can have lasting impact and consequences. And so for the creative connector, maybe it takes a long time or a lot to trigger you, but you know that that Hulk is always there, waiting to kind of burst out. And so it's our work, like Bruce Banner. I love when I get to reference Marvel when I'm teaching. Like Bruce Banner, your work is to learn how to, hone that and to know when you're triggered and really intervene and lead yourself differently. So the creative connector, the creative feeler, the weapon system is this Hulk, this lashing out in an episode that is rare but effective in a really negative way. So what about the creative thinker? The creative thinker is what we call people who have a foundational creative voice and then a pioneer second voice. So if your creative lead voice, your second voice is either a connector, like we talked about, or a pioneer. And so the creative thinker, it's different. It's not this really sloppy lashing out like a Hulk. When you feel triggered, you have a precision to your attack. And this can look like we're in a meeting and we're having a conversation and somebody brings something up that you feel triggered by, and you can so precisely point to the thing that you want to attack and take down, and take them down in a way where sometimes people don't even know that it's happened, but they feel it. They feel taken down. And maybe they can't pinpoint exactly what it is, but you can hone in on that flaw in their argument, that gap in their idea, or that just complete error in the way that they're thinking or the way that they've wronged you. Remember, creatives have a high social and organizational integrity, and they're idealists. And so maybe it's like a real value that they've wronged. And you can hone in on it and take it down with your precision, with your thorough thinking about why they're wrong and the error of their ways. And it's a way that can take them down. And people don't really recognize the effect of this in the moment, but there's a lingering effect that can happen when people are taken out by the sniper rifle of the creative thinker, the creative pioneer. So there's probably times that you've used this weapon and it feels kind of like you're justified in your anger, like we always are, but maybe recognize the damage it can do over time when that rifle is always like at the ready and you're reaching for it and kind of taking people down with these precise attacks on their ideas or even who they are. That can have some damage as well. So those are the weapon systems. I want us to think about even, for ourselves in our leadership and in the ways that we've been, working on teams or in organizations, whether now or in the past, where have you felt that you've reached for that? And you don't have to put this in the chat, but just think about a time when you can tell that you've pulled out that weapon system. You've used that in a way to lead damage to it. Well, I also want to talk about the triggers, and I'm going to jam through this so we can hopefully have some time for some good questions. But now that you know how you reach for your weapon, what triggers you? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about the nurturer. What a grave mistake. Our nurturer is always in the background, never getting the time that they deserve. I've already just modeled for you what not to do. So the nurturer, how can a nurturer have a weapon system? Well, it's kind of a subtle weapon, because the nurturer, remember, they're the ones that are bringing in all of the good ways of caring for people, relational harmony. So how can they have a weapon system? Well, what happens when a nurturer gets wronged, when a nurturer feels threatened, when they get triggered, their weapon is actually to remove their medic kit. And so we go without, as a team, we go without all the extra legwork they do to care for people, to honor people, to check in with people. And we don't feel the effects of it right away, but over time, the nurturer, since they removed their medic kit, they remove their care, sometimes it can feel like they're getting just really transactional. They're still going to do what they're supposed to do. They're still going to answer your questions and be polite. And sometimes they feel like they're being just like totally mean and aggressive, but it's just because they're not doing the extra that they normally do to care for us. So we go on about our business thinking that, okay, yeah, they're doing their work, they're delivering on their deadlines and their projects, whatever it is. But slowly over time, the whole culture of the team, of the organization, just starts to feel more cold and rigid and sharp, because they were the ones who was that oil keeping us going relationally. And so a couple months of going without recognizing people's birthdays and anniversaries makes it a very different place. Or bringing to our attention how our, the people that we're selling to or inviting into our mission, how they are receiving or perceiving us, that's going to have an effect on us. So nurturers, for you, recognize that those times that you have said Nope, I'm putting up a wall. I'm not bringing my whole self to this. I'm not bringing that care, that human touch, that human intelligence. But that is you engaging in a weapon system. And I know it's kind of shocking for you to think that you are engaging in a weapon system, but that's yours. And it's subtle, but it definitely has an effect. So let's talk about the triggers. For our pioneers, the triggers, when do you reach for that grenade launcher? When you perceive that somebody is incompetent, when you perceive that they don't have what it takes to get us where we're going, then this can be maddening, and you'd rather just take them out than have them stand in the way. When you perceive that people are challenging your competence and they don't recognize all the work you've done and how competent you are to get us where we need to go, then you reach for that grenade launcher. When people are threatening your vision, so you have a vision that we are going to go and scale this mountain, we're going to accomplish this goal, but then people get in the way of that. People start to threaten it and move in on it, then you reach for that grenade launcher. Or time wasting, maddening for the pioneer. When people are wasting time, when we could be running at a pace, running in a direction, getting there quicker, faster, and more effectively, those are the triggers for the pioneer. So for my pioneers, I want you to comment in the chat, which of these triggers feels most prominent in your life? Where do you find yourself just reaching for that grenade launcher when you start to see one of these things happening? Okay, for my connectors, this is what triggers us. People taking credit for your work. So you've done all this work of trying to bring, this resource in and set up this partnership or this collaboration. And then if people take credit for it, it feels like it's such a trigger, such a crossing, and such a disregard to your work. People not recognizing the validity of your ideas. When you put an idea on the table and it just gets dismissed as just some ambitious, frivolous option, then that can be a trigger. Also, when you just sense that people aren't for you, you just have this sense that people are not on your side, they're not with you, they're not for you, that puts your walls up, that triggers you, and you start to just subtly poison the well with a little bit of cyber warfare, a little bit of, yeah, I don't know, we've just never connected, I don't know what it is. It's just those little things that you can do to communicate that you're not, on the same page with this person. Or if people aren't willing to collaborate, you run off of collaboration on pulling in people to do things together. And when people aren't willing to do that, then it wrongs you, it triggers you, you reach for that cyber warfare, you start to poison the well with certain comments or non-comments. So for my connectors, which of these do you most resonate? Where do you find yourself getting the most triggered and kind of engaging into that cyber warfare? For the guardians, what triggers the guardians into using their interrogation? Well, it's a couple of things, but it's this lack of trust in others' credibility. So if there's a frivolous connector or a pioneer or creative talking about how we're going to change the world, but they don't feel credible to the guardians, well, then the guardian will start to interrogate them. Say, well, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to get that? How are we going to make that happen? Have you done your research? Have you done your homework? And that can really set up a conflict between some of those other more future-oriented voices and the guardian. But if they don't trust, they don't feel safe in the credibility of the leader or the other teammate, then they'll start to interrogate it. The other thing is unnecessary risk-taking. If somebody is squandering all of the resources that we've worked so hard to procure, we've done so much work up until this point, and then we're just going to risk it all? No, they see it, again, it's in the name, to guard. It's their responsibility to guard, to protect what we've worked for, so they start to engage in their interrogation. Or if there's just unresponsive arrogance. If people are just arrogant in the way that they're leading and the way that they're working, and they're not really being coachable or approachable or humble in changing based off of the facts that's in front of them, then that calls for interrogation in the mind of the guardian. And then when illogical people appear incompetent. So when people are not thinking in terms of process and system with logic and order, and they are also incompetent, then why would we trust them with our resources? Why would we follow what they're doing? Now they need to be interrogated and really kind of benched for what they're doing and kind of protect our resources from them being squandered. So guardians, which of these do you feel most triggered by? Which of these do you find the most maddening and quickly send you into that place of interrogation? Okay, creative thinkers. Again, this is creative first voice, pioneer second voice. What triggers you is this incompetence and inefficiency. It's this combination of you not really having what it takes to really deliver on what it is that we're about, but then also doing it in an inefficient way. So it's not so much, you know, the connector or the nurturer, or whoever it may be, who is like kind of a flash in the pan, kind of doing things one off or kind of improvisationally. It's not efficient, it's not competent. Well, then that gets the creative thinker reaching for that sniper rifle, wanting to just take them out, take them off. And it sometimes looks like taking the project away from them or trying to get them to, you know, go down a different path. But that is maddening for the creative thinker. Also, arrogance. The arrogance that some leaders can have, the creative thinker perceives that as totally missing all this other strategic information that they've been thinking about, and this concept and this future that they vividly see. And if someone's just arrogantly going in the other direction, then they start to reach for that sniper rifle. People appearing to dismiss your ideas. So remember this dynamic that the creative is trying to share their ideas, trying to paint the picture of the future that they see, but sometimes it's really hard for the team to understand them because it's so conceptual, or they're playing with assumptions that the rest of the team hasn't arrived at. Well, then their ideas feel dismissed, and that feels maddening because the creative thinker has done a lot of work to arrive at their ideas. They've chased down other possibilities, and all of that work feels dismissed, and they feel wronged, they feel triggered. And then exaggeration of the truth. So especially when a problem, because remember, creative thinkers are idealistic. They have this future of a compelling vision of a compelling future that they're going after. So if people are exaggerating the truth, especially when it's why we can't do it. So if a guardian is saying like, oh, well, we can't do it because we don't have this or that, or this is the problem that I'm coming to you with, we can't do your idea, or we can't do this, and they start to exaggerate the truth. Well, then the creative thinkers, they go into this mode where their mission is to like pop the bounce house, just send a bullet straight through that thought, that exaggeration, and really reduce it down to what it is and take it out completely. So that's the creative thinker. Creative thinkers on here. Creative pioneers, really. What of these four do you find yourself most triggered by? Where have you seen this show up in your leadership? And then the creative feelers. So remember, these are the creative connectors. So people who have first voice creative, second voice connectors. You Hulk out, you turn from Bruce Banner to the Hulk when you feel triggered by values that you hold dear being ignored or trampled on. So remember, creatives have this real social integrity, organizational integrity. They hold us to a high standard. And so when they see that something that they really value, hold dear on, it is almost a moral principle for them getting wrong, or people getting wrong in a systemic way, well, then they will lash out and they will blow up like the Hulk. Or when people that you feel responsible for are being treated badly. So if you're a leader and you have people on your team and you're seeing others in your department or others in the company or in the marketplace itself treat them badly, well, then you want to just lash out and Hulk out. And again, even if there's some righteous anger in that, resorting to your weapon system is never a good thing. It always does more damage. And so when you Hulk out, you're going to do some residual damage that may not be what you intend, and it may be bigger than what the situation actually called for. The other trigger is when someone breaks a promise to you, when someone wrongs you in a way that violates trust. Well, then you want to Hulk out against the whole relationship and not just the situation, and maybe do some digging into what is actually the reality of it. So that is the trigger. So for my creative feelers or creative connectors, which of these is most triggering for you in your life and leadership? So that's where we're at. And the nurturer, I did it again. I missed the nurturer again. I don't know what's wrong with me. You know what it is? With the creatives being split in two, I do 5 and I think I'm done. Wow, forgive me, nurturers. Meredith, you're a nurturer, so I'm gonna apologize to you outright. But the triggers for the nurturer: when do you remove that medic bag? When you feel taken for granted. All of the work that you do to subtly keep us in relational harmony, when that is dismissed, then man, you just say, okay, I'm not going to do it anymore then. I'm not going to go that extra mile. And then we end up feeling the effects of that later on. Or when you don't feel heard. So remember, when a nurturer is silent, it's not that they don't have anything to say, it's that it requires the team to really lean in and listen. And so when they don't feel like they're what it is, all the work it takes for them to actually bring something to the table, and if that's not heard, well, then they say, okay, I'm going to remove that medic bag and I'm not going to do the extra work of care. When your values are being ignored, so when you see that we are a company that's driven by performance and profit, and those things are so valuable, But when it doesn't make its way to then actually valuing people in and through our organization, then that's when you say, I'm not going to participate and bring myself to this. I'm just going to do the bare minimum and reduce our interactions to just transactions and not actually care and nurture and lead from that place. The other thing is when people you care about are being treated unfairly. When you see that people are being treated unfairly in or through the organization and the people that you care about, that's when you say, kind of by proxy and kind of in solidarity, you remove your meta kit and you say, I'm not going to participate. So watch for when you're doing that, because even though it feels like it's not doing so much damage, it does damage over time. And it's robbing us of the good contribution that you bring as a nurturer. So that is the 5 voices, the weapon systems for each voice, and the triggers for each voice. So I'm going to stop there, and Meredith, you can jump on and kind of guide us from there, but I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. You plowed through that. It was awesome. So far, we don't have a ton of questions, but a couple people did ask, can they have multiple foundational voices, which I think you kind of talked a little bit about your foundational and then a secondary voice. Can you talk a little bit more about, just for people to understand the 5 voices order, just a quick little overview of that?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so the way that the voices work is that you have a foundational voice, and then the other 4 kind of follow in a specific order. And so what's really important is to know your foundational voice and then your 5th voice, which is your nemesis voice. And so as we've been talking and you've been hearing about what it's like for a connector to operate or what it's like for a nurture, if you're like, oh my gosh, people actually think that way or people lead that way, those people drive me nuts, well, there's a really strong chance that that's your nemesis voice. That is your like the 5th voice. And it is possible to, it's not possible to have multiple foundational voices, but your 2nd voice can really color your 1st voice a lot. So I like to really say that what's most important is your primary voice and then your second voice. That can help bring some color to it. So if you're going back and forth between 2, chances are that one of them is really strong, and that's your foundational voice, but your 2nd one also plays a part in it as well. Good question.
Yeah, well, to honor time, Jonathan, can you let us know if there's any ways that we can dive deeper into this, if people are curious, understanding their voices more, understanding 5 voices, and if there was anything out of this that they kind of experience where they can, explore that opportunity of learning more about their voice.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple ways to do that. One, if you're not already following us on Instagram, we're putting out a lot more resources geared towards leading from the core of who you are and your foundational voice. So follow Fieldwork Together on Instagram. Also, sign up for our email newsletter. If you go to fieldwork.io, that's FLDWRK.io, we're going to be rolling out ways to really dive deeper into the 5 voices pretty quickly here. So make sure you're on our newsletter, because that'll be the first place where we announce some of the things that we're working on to help you lead effectively from the core of who you are and your 5 voices. But if you want to jump in right away and you want to be coached on a one-on-one basis to help you really optimize your voice, understand it, to grow in it, and really use it to accomplish your mission, go ahead and email us, hi@fieldwork.io. So hi@fieldwork.io, and we can get you connected into coaching to help you optimize your leadership voice. But yeah, I'm looking at the chat, and man, there's such good reflection. I just want to encourage everybody to keep thinking about this, keep reflecting on it, keep doing that work of knowing yourself, to lead yourself and lead others. And it always starts by recognizing our tendencies. And make sure you sign up on our email list, because we're going to be sending out the recording of this too, so you can go back and look at all the ways that I wronged you as a nurturer, Meredith.
Okay, I forgive you.
See, that is an example of the nurturer. I
won't take my care away.
Thanks for not removing the meta kit. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone who hopped on. Like Jonathan mentioned, feel free to email us, hi@fieldwork.io, if you do have any other questions to not only to get coaching, but just have questions more for us and Fieldwork. We'd be happy to connect with you guys. So thank you. Have a good rest of your day.